Hello, everyone, and welcome to It's Your Season Life podcast, where we are discovering and living life at any age. This podcast is based on living well and eating well, with Living Well podcasts featuring guests, or maybe me talking about things that inspire me, to inspire all of us to live a life soulful and rooted in a passion with kindness, compassion, and goodness. Eating Well podcast will be focused on healthy lifestyle tips, easy recipes with a plant-forward focus, and all-around wellness. So thanks for joining me, and let's get started. Wake-up calls, we've all had them. Some are quiet voices nudging us or budging us to change. Other calls are screaming at us that we don't have time to dwell on much, like a stage 4 cancer diagnosis or a heart attack. We just go with it. Then there are those calls in between that speak to us that we file away in our filing cabinets in our brain, ready to pull for review when necessary. Thomas Friedman's book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, was an early wake-up call for me. It stayed on my bookshelf long after others had made their way back to the library or donation center. Along with the book, The World in 2050, Friedman's book made me think about our world, our environment, and how we live and potentially could be living if we don't listen to the subtle and not so subtle alarms in our environment. Hot. Per Friedman, we are going to be hot. There's no doubt about that. But we in the United States will also be in several ways fatter and louder. And honestly, we are there already. We are hot, not just because we have lived through 2023, the hottest year on record. We are hot because we are mentally hot. The world is shifting rapidly and our emotions are hot. I won't spend a lot of time on the environment as there's plenty of data in the public space about the projected effects of climate change. What is not out in the public domain is the emotional capacity for humans to work within the bounds of an insidiously warming environment. One can always pile on clothes to stay warm. You can only take off so many clothes to cool down. Just as people did before us, people will be shifting from coast to inland areas and from hot to cooler areas. And with that, we will be clothing ourselves with hotter emotions. Fat. We are large, at least in the United States. Approximately 40% of U.S. adult citizens over 20 in 2023 had a BMI greater than 30 and were considered obese, not even overweight. I call a spade because I've had battles with my own weight. Over the decades, my weight shifted up and down, but always on the trend towards stabilizing just under overweight. I never reached the obesity threshold, but carrying around an extra 20 pounds or so since high school just takes its toll. It's a continual effort to restrain myself from decades of socialization under the standard American diet. For 6 years, we've been primarily plant-based, and it's been one of the best things I've ever done. But fatter minds. The U.S. is a consumptive society built around the social norm of more. From post-World War II to the internet age, we have shown the world that we have adequate goods, a supply chain, and wealth. And it shows physically and figuratively. My husband and I were watching a series about the business titans of the late 20th century. It was about large box warehouse member stores that tweaked the imagination of the general public, that somehow we needed more cost savings from bulk purchases. And they also fed an insatiable mental appetite that there was and is based on some measure of scarcity. Fear of missing out meets the shopping cart, overindulging, high consumption, and a baseline consumer mentality of not being able to function with less, or at a minimum, adequate. Louder. Thankfully, some want to be expressive and share thoughts and concerns in some insightful outward manner. In many ways, that is how the United States came into being. We went loud with resistance, newsprint, a revolution, and a constitution. But now social media allows individuals to be even louder, and not in a good way. Social media allows individuals the freedom to speak their minds unfiltered and reckless. Social media has allowed us to say things we would never say to anyone who we might have to absolutely look in the eye. Social media allows us to engage in uncivil discourse with strangers without civility, care, or compassion. I can cite many recent incidences on platforms such as Nextdoor and Facebook, community groups, in which someone asks for help or recommendations, and community members use the opportunity to criticize or comment negatively about the request. Some of them read like this: "Why on earth would you want to do that? Good grief, can't you go somewhere else?" Wow, in a critical way. Now when I write a request or share helpful information on a social platform, I include the note, please respond only to the request, helpful suggestions only. I respectfully request readers to please refrain from opinions or similar. It actually works. And that is the world we live in. We have to instruct people on what is civil and not civil. We have to have skills to successfully ward off the combative commentary vultures who want to politicize everything by defining what we are specifically asking for and what we don't appreciate seeing as helpful, which 10 years ago would have been unheard of. Civil dialogue. There's a huge difference between debate, discussion, and dialogue. Debate is combative, seeks to be victorious, and aims to prove a point. Discussion is a more civil form of debate where ideas are challenged, and dialogue is collaborative, seeking shared understanding and open exchange of ideas. Divisive debate with strangers deepens the chasm we are trying to cross to build a sense of community. It's hard, but we must resist the temptation to allow our darker thoughts, which we all have, to admit themselves in debate with strangers just because we can. Having true dialogue with a stranger on social media is difficult, as the nuances of an in-person interaction are missing. Even with community rules on many of these platforms, there are few guidelines about how to have a meaningful dialogue, such as, it may be helpful when both parties share some appreciative thoughts, such as, in quotes, I may not agree, but I understand your viewpoint. It may not be exact, but I think or believe I can relate to what you are saying. Or simply, I hear, read, and understand your point. May I share mine? Somehow understanding has become equivalent to agreement, and that is not so. We can understand something without agreeing and understanding, and this creates civility. Yes, in 2050, the world may be hot, flat, and crowded. Physically hot, flat, level global economic field, and crowded with an expected population of almost 10 billion people. Yet being emotionally hot, physically and mentally fat, and uncivilly loud will impact how these 10 billion people will function in a world with scarcer resources, from healthcare to food, for what is to come. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a new tip for living well and celebrating life every day. Give me a shout out with comments or suggestions for future Living Well podcasts. Be sure and check out my website podcast page with other interviews of awesome guests, or maybe me just talking and sharing their love for living well. You can find me at itsyourseason.life and just search Lisa Boesen, Boesen. And remember, it's always your season to celebrate life at any age. Yes, in 2050, the world may be hot, flat, and crowded. Physically hot, flat, level global economic field, and crowded with an expected population of almost 10 billion people. Yet being emotionally hot, physically and mentally fat, and uncivilly loud will impact how these 10 billion people will function in a world with scarcer resources, from healthcare to food, for what is to come.